Have you ever felt like an imposter? That cold dread that runs down your spine, the feeling that everything you are, everything you have, is built on an unstable foundation, and that with just one gust of truth, the entire castle will come crumbling down? We all feel that way in the vulnerable moments of our lives. But imagine if that fear was not just a feeling, but the very essence of an entire empire. Today, our channel will not tell you a fairy tale. We will pull you through the dust of ages to a kingdom built on a colossal lie, ruled by a queen whose every breath was a desperate attempt to conceal the truth. A story of power, of deception, and of the price to be paid when a soul dares to place itself in the position of the creator. But the end of this story, the way the truth is revealed, it will be unlike anything you can imagine. It will challenge everything you believe about justice, about villains, and about mercy. So, before we pull back the curtain of time, let me know, where in the world are you listening to this story from? And what time is it where you are? Leave a comment so we know that no matter where you may be, we are all stepping into this journey together. Now, take a deep breath. The story begins. Our story does not begin with the sound of trumpets or cheers, but with the endless murmur of waves and the whispers of intrigue. Let us turn our gaze to the maritime empire of Lyra, a naval superpower where wealth flowed like the tide and power was traded in the shadows of marble corridors. In Lyra, ships with full-blown sails carried not just spices and gold, they carried secrets that could topple thrones. The air here was thick with the salt of the ocean, mingled with the scent of lavish perfumes and the metallic tang of silent purges. And at the pinnacle of this empire of intrigue reigned a queen named Lyra. To her subjects, she was the embodiment of Lyra itself, breathtakingly beautiful, terrifyingly wise, and ruthlessly decisive. Her gaze could make the most seasoned generals bow their heads, and her smile could conceal the most venomous of plots. It was said that Lyra was born from sea foam and nurtured by the ocean gods, that the blood of great conquering kings flowed through her veins. But that, right there, was the first and most foundational lie of all. The truth, a truth buried beneath 7 layers of palace secrets, was that Lyra carried not a single drop of royal blood. She was an orphan, a nameless soul who had known the cold of stone floors and the darkness of a squalid orphanage, a place where hope was a greater luxury than bread. But fate had smiled upon her with a malicious grin. The old king of Lyra, a master of strategy who was without an heir, found her. He did not see a pitiful child. He saw perfect, malleable clay. He did not give her a family. He gave her a role. He did not teach her of love. He taught her the art of manipulation. Every day she was trained to walk, to stand, to speak, and to think like a true heir. Her mind was sharpened like a dagger, and her heart was armored in steel so that no emotion could ever pierce it. She became the perfect political pawn, a meticulously crafted product designed to preserve the stability of the empire. And then, when the old king passed away, Lyra ascended the throne. The lie had become reality. The imposter had become the queen. But power, no matter how immense, could not banish the ghost of the past. The throne did not bring Lyra peace. It only amplified her constant fear. She suffered from imposter syndrome on an imperial scale. Every cheer from her subjects sounded like a jeer in her ears. Every admiring glance felt like an accusation. In the long, quiet nights when she shed her royal robes and magnificent jewels, she was left alone with the whisper in her head, "You are a lie. One day they will all know. One day they will come to reclaim what you have stolen." That very fear became her engine. It turned her into a ruler even more ruthless than her adopted father had taught her to be. Every action, every decision she made stemmed not just from ambition, but from the desperation of someone trying to shout down the voice of truth in her own soul. She had to prove she was worthy, that she was not a fraud. She had to build a legacy so grand that no one would dare question its origins. She believed that if her empire was strong enough, brilliant enough, Its glory would outshine the darkness of the foundational lie. And then her chance to do just that arrived from a distant land, a kingdom that was the complete antithesis of Lyria. A marriage proposal was sent, not from a mighty empire, but from an arid desert kingdom named Iridian. To the courtiers of Lyria, this was a meaningless alliance, but to Lyra, this was not a marriage. It was a conquest. Iridian would be the first stone upon which she would build a new empire, an empire of her own making, an empire so solid that not even the Creator could shake it. She did not know that by stepping into that land of sand and faith, she was also beginning her walk down the path to her fated judgment. The kingdom of Iridian was another world entirely. If Lyria was an ocean of deception and luxury, then Iridian was a desert of authenticity and austerity. Here there were no bustling ports or magnificent palaces. Instead, there were endless sand dunes, where the sun existed not to display wealth, but to test the fortitude of humankind. The people of Iridian did not worship a pantheon of sea and harvest gods. They bowed to only one, a single unseen creator who was present in every desert wind, every rare drop of evening dew, and in every one of their brave hearts. Their faith was simple but as solid as the rock formations that jutted out from the sea of sand. And the ruler of this kingdom was King Kalin. Unlike the scheming monarchs of Lyria, Kalin was a young king, a soul still pure who carried romantic ideals within him. He inherited the throne during a difficult time as the kingdom faced drought and threats from neighboring tribes. His council had urged him to seek a political alliance, and the name of Lyra of the Maritime Empire was mentioned as a strategic solution. When Kalin first met Lyra, he was utterly captivated, but not by political calculations. He was enthralled by her very being. He saw a queen of divine beauty, a sharp intellect that could solve the most complex problems, and an inner strength that seemed unshakable. In Kalin's eyes, Lyra was not a product of intrigue, but a wonder of creation. He did not see the hardness in her heart. He saw resilience. He did not hear the fear in her words. He heard only decisiveness. He fell in love, a passionate, blind, and tragic love. For Lyra, Kalin's love was just another tool, perhaps the most powerful one she had ever possessed. She accepted his proposal, not because her heart stirred, but because she saw in the young king's adoring eyes a wide-open gate through which she could walk and seize the very soul of his kingdom. Their marriage was not just a political alliance. It was the beginning of a toxic relationship, a collision of two worlds. When Lyra left Lyria, she brought with her not only a precious dowry, but also the ideology, the culture, and the false gods of her homeland. Her ship docked in Iridian like a magnificent Trojan horse, carrying within it the seeds of destruction. And King Kalin, the man who should have been the guardian of his people's faith, became the one who opened the city gates. He was painfully torn. On one side was his burning love, an almost absolute devotion to his extraordinary wife. On the other was his heavy responsibility to the Creator and to the oath his ancestors had sworn. Every day he lied to himself that he could reconcile the two, that his love could reform Lyra, that her presence would bring prosperity to Iridian without harming their faith. He was wrong, so utterly wrong. Lyra did not come to assimilate. She came to dominate. She began her conquest subtly. She used her charm and intellect to manipulate Kalin, turning him into a puppet on her strings. The kingdom's decisions were no longer made in the council chambers, but in the royal bedchamber. Loyal advisors, those who dared to warn the king of the foreign influence, were gradually replaced by opportunists from Lyria or by Iridians who had been blinded by power. The kingdom of Iridian began to change. Austerity and simplicity were slowly replaced by Lyrian-style luxury and waste. But the most terrifying change was not material, it was spiritual. Because Lyra knew that to truly control a people, she had to control what they worshipped. And her real war in Iridian was about to begin. a war against the very creator of this land. The first crack appeared not on the city walls, but in the hearts of the Iridian people. Lyra, with the silent consent of a king blinded by love, began her spiritual revolution. She did not directly forbid the worship of the Creator. She was too clever for that. Instead, she sowed a seductive weed in the arid soil of their faith. She argued to Kalin and the court that a great kingdom needed the protection of many gods, that the Creator of the desert might be powerful, but the gods of the sea and the rains from Lyria would bring tangible prosperity. She spoke of bountiful harvests, of safe trade routes, of a wealthy and powerful Iridian. It was a sweet temptation, a promise of an earthly paradise, and many began to listen. But there was one man who did not just listen. He heard the screaming lie behind those honeyed words. His name was Zekiel. Zekiel was not a courtier or a nobleman. He was a prophet, a man who lived in seclusion among the rocky canyons, a man with a face as weathered as his homeland, and eyes that burned with the fire of truth. To him, the Creator was not an option. He was breath, he was life. But his confrontation with Lyra was not merely a holy mission, it was also a quest for personal justice. Years before, when Lyra was first consolidating her power in Lyria, she had indirectly caused a small purge to eliminate families who stood in her way. Zekiel's family, Iridian merchants doing business in Lyria, were tragically caught in the maelstrom and slaughtered. Zekiel was the sole survivor, carrying a scar that would never heal. He did not just see Lyra as a pagan queen, he saw her as the embodiment of injustice, a monster in magnificent robes who had taken everything from him. When Zekiel heard that Lyra had become the queen of his own homeland, he knew that fate had brought his enemy to his doorstep. He emerged from his seclusion, stepped out of the desert, and his voice began to thunder. Their first confrontation took place in the palace courtyard. Lyra, in her lavish attire, stood on high, looking down. Zekiel, in his worn cloak, stood on the ground, but his gaze was unflinching. He did not speak of lofty theology, he spoke of the naked truth. "O Queen," his voice echoed, "you bring us silk and fine wine, but you are taking our souls. You promise us rain for our crops, but you are sowing a storm that will sweep everything away. You are asking us to bow to idols of gold and stone, the work of human hands, and to forget the Creator who molded us from the dust." Kalin tried to intervene, but Lyra silenced him with a wave of her hand. She looked directly at Zekiel, a cold smile playing on her lips. To her, he was not just a meddlesome prophet. He was the personification of everything she hated and feared, an unshakable truth, a past she wanted to bury. She saw in his eyes not just the judgment of a god, but the accusation of a victim, and the fear of being exposed rose in her more fiercely than ever before. She did not argue with him. She simply declared, "This kingdom needs progress, not the superstitions of the desert. Whoever stands in the way of progress is an enemy of Iridian." The line had been drawn. The war was no longer subtle. It was now public. On one side, the queen with all her power, wealth, and a lovesick king in her hand. On the other, a lone prophet with only faith and truth as his weapons. The battle for the soul of Iridian had officially begun. The storm of false gods began to sweep across Iridian, not with wind and sand, but with gold and stone. On Lyra's orders, magnificent temples to the gods of Lyria began to rise in the heart of Iridian cities, dwarfing the simple places of worship for the Creator. There were exquisitely carved statues, lavishly decorated altars, and rituals full of color and seductive music. This was a masterful psychological war. Lyra did not force the people to abandon their old faith. She simply gave them a more attractive alternative. She linked idolatry with tangible prosperity. She brought engineers from Lyria to build advanced irrigation systems, allowing the dry fields of Iridian to yield bountiful harvests for the first time. She opened new trade routes, bringing unprecedented wealth to the merchants. And she said, "Behold, these are the blessings of the gods I bring. They do not just promise, they provide. That message was powerful. It struck at the most basic human needs. For a farmer who had struggled with drought his entire life, the sight of a green field was a more tangible miracle than any prayer. For a merchant, a full purse of gold was more convincing evidence than any prophecy. Gradually, the people of Iridian began to waver. They started to believe they could worship both, that they could keep their faith in the Creator in their hearts, but still seek the favor of the new gods for a better life. That is the most subtle trap of idolatry. It does not demand you deny God immediately. It only asks you to place something else on equal footing with Him. Money, power, security, wealth, they become the new gods, the modern-day Baals. King Caelan, lost in his love and overwhelmed by the prosperity Lyra brought, completely gave in. He convinced himself that this was a golden age for Iridian, that his queen was a gift from the heavens. He attended ceremonies in the new temples, stood beside Lyra as she offered sacrifices to idols, and his smile legitimized this betrayal in the eyes of the people. But amidst that storm, the cry of Zekiel continued to ring out. He traveled across the kingdom from the bustling cities to the remote villages, and his message never changed. O people of Iridian, you are trading your eternal souls for a temporary harvest. You are selling your freedom in the Creator for the golden shackles of Lyra. She gives you water, but she takes away the spring of life. She gives you bread, but she takes away the word of life. Wake up before it is too late. His words were like daggers plunging into the consciences of those who still held to their faith. He did not just speak of theology, he spoke of justice. He pointed to the oppressed farmers who had to pay heavier taxes to build the lavish temples. He pointed to the exploited craftsmen who were forced to carve the lifeless statues. He pointed to the soul of Iridian, which was being sold off day by day. Zekiel's words began to have an effect. Small groups of people started gathering to listen to him. The old faith, which had seemed buried under the glamour of wealth, began to smolder once more. And this, Lyra could not tolerate. Zekiel was no longer a nuisance. He had become a real threat to her authority. His voice was a constant reminder of her fraudulence, of the emptiness of her promises. Her fear turned to rage. She realized that as long as Zekiel lived, her lie was not safe. She went to Caelan, not with sweet words, but with a cold ultimatum. That man is sowing division. He is resisting progress. He is resisting me. And whoever resists me, resists you. You must choose. It is either him or it is me. Forced to choose between the prophet of his people and the woman he loved more than life itself, Caelan made a tragic decision. He nodded. Immediately, a warrant for Zekiel's arrest was issued throughout the kingdom. He was charged with treason, disturbing the peace, and defaming the royalty. The ideological confrontation had officially turned into a bloody manhunt. The royal soldiers scoured the canyons and deserts. Anyone found hiding Zekiel was severely punished. Lyra's war had entered a new, more brutal phase. She no longer hid her iron fist in a velvet glove. She was willing to use blood to extinguish the flame of truth, not knowing that this act would only bring her day of judgment closer. The fire of judgment was finally kindled, not in a palace, but on a barren mountaintop where only the wind and rocks bore witness. The summit of lightning, an ancient holy place of the Iridian people, was chosen as the stage for the final showdown. After months in hiding, Zekiel, prompted by a divine urging, sent a challenge to Queen Lyra. Not a challenge of arms, but a challenge of faith. "Gather all the priests of your gods," he said, "and I will come alone. We will go to the summit of lightning. We will each prepare a sacrifice, and the God who answers with fire, he shall be the true God." For Lyra, this was a perfect opportunity to destroy Zekiel once and for all, not with a sword, but with public humiliation before the entire nation. She was certain of the power of her rituals and the support of the crowd. She accepted the challenge and commanded all of Iridian to gather at the foot of the mountain to witness the failure of the rebel. On that day, the entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath. Thousands of people flocked to the summit of lightning. On the peak, 2 altars were built. On one side, hundreds of priests of the Lyrian gods, in their colorful vestments, surrounded their altar. On the other, Zekiel stood alone beside a simple pile of stones, looking small and solitary. King Kalin and Queen Lyra sat on a raised platform, observing it all. Lyra's priests began first. They danced, they sang, they cut themselves with small knives according to their ritual, and they screamed the names of their gods from morning until noon. But the only answer they received was the silence of the sky and the whistling of the wind through the rocks. Nothing happened. Lyra began to feel a knot of anxiety, but she maintained her proud facade. Zekiel looked at them, not with triumph, but with a deep sadness. He spoke to the crowd. "Shout louder, perhaps your God is deep in thought, or maybe he is traveling, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened." His words were like salt in their wounds. The priests cried out even more frantically, but it was all in vain. Finally, exhausted and humiliated, they collapsed. Then it was Zekiel's turn. He calmly repaired the altar of the Creator with 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Iridian. Then he did something strange. He ordered people to pour water on the sacrifice and the altar, not just once, but 3 times, until water was overflowing everywhere, filling the trench he had dug around it. Now, igniting the sacrifice with ordinary fire was impossible. Then Zekiel knelt. He did not shout. He simply offered a simple prayer, but one that held all the faith and pain of an entire people. "O Creator, God of our ancestors, let it be known today that you are the true God in Iridian, and that I am your servant. Answer me, O Lord, answer me with fire, so that this people will know that you are calling their hearts back to you." For a moment, the entire summit was wrapped in absolute silence. And then, from the clear sky, a brilliant bolt of fire descended. It did not just consume the sacrifice. It consumed the wood, the water-soaked stones, and licked up the water in the trench. A terrifying heat and a divine light engulfed the altar. The crowd was horrified. Then, as one, all the thousands of people fell prostrate on the ground, and a single unified shout rose up, "The Creator is the true God! The Creator is the true God!" On the platform, Kalin's face was ashen. He trembled, finally realizing his terrible mistake. But Lyra's face was not one of awe or repentance. It was one of fury. The insane rage of someone who had been stripped bare, humiliated in front of everyone. The power of the Creator did not humble her, it only made her hate more. In that moment, the cloak of power she had woven from lies was incinerated by the fire of judgment. She had seen the truth, but she had rejected it. Her pride and fear had turned her heart to stone, and that was the point of no return. Her fate was sealed, not by the fire from heaven, but by the hardness of her own soul. A long-forgotten prophecy of the Iridian people began to be whispered again. When the imposter sits on the throne and the desert is forced to worship the god of the sea, a ghost from the past will return to reclaim what was lost, and the fall will come from where no one expects. The battle on the summit of lightning was over, but the war for Iridian was only just beginning. The event on the summit of lightning shook Iridian to its very core. Faith in the Creator rose like a desert storm, sweeping away the temples of the false gods. Lyra's priests were hunted down, and the people themselves destroyed the statues they had once bowed to. King Kalin, awakened from his stupor, was consumed by remorse and shame. He locked himself in the palace, no longer daring to face his subjects or the god he had betrayed. But Lyra was different. Defeat did not break her. It turned her into a wounded animal, making her even more dangerous. She fortified her loyal mercenary forces from Lyria, turning the royal palace into a fortress and ruling by absolute fear. Iridian was fractured, a simmering civil war about to erupt. In the midst of this chaos, a name began to be spoken in the Iridian army. a name spoken with reverence and a touch of awe. Valerius. General Valerius was the commander of the Sandstorm Legion, the most elite force in Iridian. He was a legendary warrior, a brilliant strategist who had won countless victories on the borders. Valerius was a man of silence. He spoke little, his face was always as cold as stone, and his eyes were deep, holding a secret no one could read. He was loyal to Iridian, but his loyalty was not to a king or queen. It was to the land itself and its faith. As the kingdom fell into chaos and King Kalen lost all credibility, the generals and elders of Iridian secretly went to Valerius. They gave him one final and most difficult mission: to march on the capital, depose Queen Lyra, and restore order to the kingdom. Valerius accepted without a moment's hesitation. As the Sandstorm Legion of Valerius marched toward the capital, they met no significant resistance. The Iridian army opened the city gates for them. Lyra's purge was confined within the walls of her palace. The ghost from the past, as foretold in the prophecy, had returned. When news of Valerius's advance reached Lyra, she knew the end had come, but she would not run, she would not beg. She would face her downfall with the same pride that had defined her entire life. She ordered her attendants to dress her in her most magnificent royal robes, to apply her makeup brilliantly, and to adorn her with the most precious jewels. She did not do this out of vanity. This was her final armor, a declaration that she would die as a queen, not as an imposter. She stood by the window of the throne room, looking down at the army advancing into the courtyard, cold, motionless, waiting. Valerius entered the throne room alone. His soldiers remained outside. This was not a battle, it was a confrontation. The vast room was engulfed in a tense silence, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through the empty corridors. Lyra looked at him, a sarcastic smile on her lips. "So the desert has finally produced a wolf brave enough to claim my life. You want this throne, General? Here it is." But Valerius did not look at the throne. He looked directly into her eyes, a piercing gaze, not of an enemy, but of someone who knew. And then he spoke, his voice low and steady, but each word was like a sledgehammer blow to Lyra's soul. "I have not come to take the throne of Iridian." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "I have come to reclaim the throne of Lyra." Lyra's entire world collapsed, not by a sword, but by a sentence. The smile on her lips froze, the pride in her eyes shattered. "What? What did you say?" she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time in her life. And then Valerius told the story. He spoke of a stormy night in Lyria years ago, of an infant prince switched at birth with an orphan by the king's own confidants, then cast away by the sea to be disposed of. He spoke of an Iridian fishing family who found the baby, brought him to the desert, and raised him as their own. He spoke of a boy who grew up with a burning secret in his heart, who joined the army, fought, and waited, waiting for the fateful day to reclaim what had been stolen. "I know who you are, Lyra," Valerius said. His voice held no hatred, only an endless sorrow. "Because the throne you have sat on, the life you have lived, was meant to be mine." It was the truth, the most devastating truth, the twist of fate that Lyra could never have imagined. Her greatest enemy, the one who came to end her, was the living, breathing reality of the lie she had built. She was not defeated by a prophet or a distant god. She was defeated by the very past she had tried to bury. All the strength, the pride, the defiance in her vanished. All that remained was an infinite emptiness. She had run her entire life, only to come face to face with the truth in the eyes of the man she had replaced. She no longer screamed, no longer challenged. She was just silent. A silence of total defeat, but also one tinged with a tragic release. The burden she had carried her entire life was finally lifted. She slowly turned her back on Valerius, walked towards the wide-open window, and looked down at the cold stone courtyard below. It was not an act of desperation. It was an acceptance. She had lived as a false queen, and now she would die facing the true king. Her fall was not a scream, but a whisper. The whisper of a destiny that had finally found its way home. As Lyra's body lay on the cold flagstones of the inner courtyard, a heavy silence fell over the palace. According to the ancient laws of Iridian for enemies and traitors, her body was to be left for the beasts of the desert. It was the ultimate punishment, a disgrace even after death. The soldiers of Valerius began to step back to let the law take its course. But then Valerius raised his hand. Stop. Everyone was astonished. He slowly walked over, stood looking at the woman who had stolen his life. The one who had lived in luxury while he grew up in the harsh desert. The one who had brought so much suffering to the land he loved. Hatred, vengeance, all of it would have been justified. But Valerius did not see a monster. He saw a tragedy. He saw another orphan who was also a victim of a cruel conspiracy initiated by his own father. She was a tool, just as he could have been a tool if he had not been saved. The cycle of lies and hatred had begun a generation before, and he knew if he allowed vengeance to continue, it would never end. He removed his own commander's cloak, a cloak the color of the desert sand, and gently laid it over Lyra. Then he turned, looked at his soldiers, and gave an order that would forever change the history of Iridian. She entered this kingdom as the Queen of Iridian, his voice rang out, clear and firm. And she will leave this world as a Queen of Iridian. Prepare a royal funeral, bury her with all honors. A stunned silence spread. Mercy for the enemy, for the one who brought idolatry and nearly destroyed the kingdom. But in that command, the people of Iridian did not see weakness. They saw a new kind of strength, a strength greater than swords or power, the strength to forgive, the strength to break the cycle of vengeance. That small act by Valerius became the foundation for the healing of an entire nation. It showed that the revival of Iridian came not just from eradicating false gods and restoring faith in the Creator. It came from the rise of compassion, of a righteousness that knew not only how to punish, but also how to love. The kingdom was cleansed, not by blood and fire, but by an unexpected act of mercy. Valerius, who had every reason to hate, chose to be a better leader, one who not only knew how to reclaim what was his, but also how to sow the seeds of hope for the future. The throne of Lyra awaited him, but he had learned his most valuable lesson in the Iridian desert. A true kingdom is not built on power or lies, but on a foundation of truth and mercy. Hope, like a resilient desert flower, began to blossom amidst the ashes. The fall of Queen Lyra teaches us that the biggest and most dangerous lie is not the one we tell others, but the one we tell ourselves. That when we try to build our lives on a foundation of falsehood, whether out of ambition or fear, that wall will eventually collapse under the weight of the truth. But this story also leaves a glimmer of light, that even in the ashes of the harshest truth, mercy can still blossom. That true healing comes not from vengeance, but from the ability to see the brokenness in our very enemy. And now, a final question for you. What do you think of Valerius's final act? Does a person who has committed so many sins, like Lyra, deserve mercy in the end? Leave your thoughts in the comments. There is no right or wrong answer, because your response says a lot about how we view justice and forgiveness in the complex world we live in. If today's journey has touched your heart, and if you want to continue exploring profound historical and spiritual stories with our channel, stories that have the power to change the way we see our lives, do not forget to press the subscribe button. Thank you for listening. Shalom.